Hi, everyone. I'm Iya Affo, the Director of Training and Development for the Resilience Empowerment Project and the Arizona ACES Consortium. It's good to see all of you. Thank you so much for tuning in. For those of you who are educators, oh my goodness, congratulations on another year down post-COVID, right? Woo, woo, woo. I know it's no easy feat. So I just want to express how much we thank you and we honor you for everything that you're pouring into our youth, right? Um, every youth is important, every student matters, and you give so much of yourself to do the work that you do, and you often go unnoticed and unrecognized and not necessarily honored and loved and cared for. So I just want to express that to all of you and thank you. Um, I want to close off the year talking again about PBIS. We talked kind of in depth about it last time, and I just want to wrap up with the basic points and maybe some things that we can be thinking about over the summer. So the positive behavioral interventions and supports, it really serves as a way to label, surveil, and punish our kiddos. And that really goes against being trauma informed. Because when we look at things from a trauma informed lens, we recognize that there's something that drives behavior. And maybe we're better suited to advocate against the use of PBIS in schools and instead really focus our efforts on culturally sustainable pedagogies and systemic trauma-informed practices and that salutogenic approach, right? That affirming practices based on asset views of students and communities. Although PBIS is presented as supporting students and social emotional well-being for all students, educators, and families, really in practice, it upholds or perhaps even creates harm, right? And I think despite its promises to reduce disparities in discipline and learning, PBIS really does not disrupt racist beliefs, such as deficit views and color evasiveness, and it really views cultural responsiveness as an add-on. It's not really a part of what it does. But since we've discovered all of this information about trauma and it's really coming to the forefront, and we have this trauma-informed movement, now it's okay. Well, how can we add that into the PBIS foundation? And so we have to look at SAMHSA's guidance, right, on trauma-informed care. And SAMHSA emphasizes the importance of addressing cultural, historical, and gender issues, right? SAMHSA is saying essentially that really to be trauma-informed, we have to be inclusive, we have to have equity, we have to be looking at things through the lens of the disempowered and marginalized groups. We really have to focus on some of those things in order to be trauma informed. And perhaps PBIS reproduces and produces trauma, specifically race-based and ableist trauma within schools. Trauma-informed education is potentially a very powerful paradigm shift for schools, but it loses its potency when it's connected to PBIS because they're two fundamentally different points of view. PBIS is really based on behaviorism, right? So we have adults that are deciding what is normal behavior, what is not normal behavior, what's behavior that's comfortable, what's behavior that's not uncomfortable. And then we identify students that don't have the behavior that the adults want. We surveil them, we label them, and as a result, they're punished, right, with either some form of discipline or being tracked into special education or into programs that are off campus and it others students instead of being inclusive. We know that COVID-19 has been a collective trauma, right? And when we talk about collective trauma, what we're talking about is the fact that because we are part of the collective known as human beings, we have all been impacted by COVID-19, even if we were not directly affected, right? Even if we didn't get sick or no one in our family got sick or we didn't lose someone, just because we are part of the collective known as human beings, we've been impacted by COVID-19. And that event has really strained our community ties and our collective sense of meaning and safety. So the impacts of collective trauma can really disproportionately affect those that are already experiencing marginalization. And although collective trauma impacts school communities, right, and that's a big thing, we look at, the collective trauma piece, we also have to look at the ongoing trauma of oppression as well, right, for individual experiences of trauma inside or outside of school. Youth of color are really impacted by interpersonal violence as well as systemic oppression, and they can be undergoing what is termed as persistent traumatic stress. So in that case, right, trauma is continuous and ongoing. It's not a thing of the past. And what we also know is that trauma is cumulative. So we have the impact of the collective trauma on top of the impact of ongoing trauma. And suddenly we find our students from disempowered communities really at a disadvantage. And this reality means that it's essential for schools to rethink policy, practice, and pedagogy through an understanding of how trauma influences learning and the school community. Trauma-informed education is one way to do that. Now, I guess one of the more difficult pieces is that among our existing research, there is no real consensus on a particular framework or model for trauma-informed care, or we often don't even agree on what trauma-informed means, right, in a school context. So in schools, trauma-informed education can really refer to a wide range of practices. So from emotional learning and having regard for social emotional situations to relooking at, reconsidering disciplinary practices that will be sensitive to not re-traumatizing students that are already going through trauma. All the way to having sensitivity around the curriculum. A broader definition of trauma-informed education includes trauma prevention as well as trauma-informed educational practices that respond to the impacts of trauma on the entire school community and preventing future trauma from occurring. So trauma-informed education on a whole school level may include adjustments to policy, adjustment to community, and community school partnerships, and of course, professional development on violence prevention and harm reduction. Although trauma-informed education often has a lot of positive feedback, I do have to mention that many scholars in the field have critiqued mainstream implications of trauma-informed education, noting that without the critical structural lens, it can reproduce deficit views of marginalized children and continue to place the burden of change on the individual and not the system and environment in which the individual exists. So we really want to make sure that we're looking at the system itself and what policies and procedures are in place And how are we taking care of our disempowered students? So it's just some food for thought, right? So as we enjoy the summer months, maybe we can be thinking about ways to focus our efforts on culturally sustaining practices, trauma-informed, systemic trauma-informed practices, and those salutogenic perspective that really emphasizes the assets that our students and our communities contribute. So have a wonderful, safe, and relaxing summer. And thank you so much for being a part of our community. And we'll see you next year. Bye-bye.